On this edition of the program, it's all about uniting against terror, the effects of war, and fears of Ebola. First up, following the Charlie Hebdo attack last week, which led to the loss of 17 lives, the French president reiterates his country's refusal to be intimidated, and African countries like Ivory Coast show their support. Then we look at how the crisis in the world's newest country is affecting its citizens.
They are in better conditions now, but we still have a long way to go until we are where everybody wants to be, which is a safe and secure South Sudan, where everybody feels safe enough to go home.
And countries come together for the love of football, but the fear of Ebola is present.
It was not like it was a surprise 8-9 months ago when people were not really considering it risky. Today, everybody knows it's risky, the population, the government, and everybody is acting accordingly. So the risk of having any case today is, I think, it's reduced than 8 or 9 months ago.
Welcome to Network Africa with me, Cynthia Ray. Last week's terrorist activities in France was clearly one which was felt by the world. It was an impact so intense, the dignitaries from around the world, particularly from the West, like the British Prime Minister David Cameron, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to name a few, showed up at the French capital, Paris, to show their support for France in their stance against terrorism. 2 days later, a simultaneous funeral service took place in France and Jerusalem to honor those who lost their lives during the 3-day siege, and it was a heartfelt ceremony in which the President, François Hollande, bestowed the highest honor of Légion d'honneur, meaning Legion of Honor, upon the 2 late policemen and women. He also seized the opportunity to reiterate that France would never bow to terrorism. In other parts of the world, like former French colony Ivory Coast, journalists and supporters in Abidjan came together for a solidarity march and candlelight vigil in memory of the victims of the Charlie Hebdo massacre.
Protesters gathered together in Abidjan to pay homage to the victims of the fatal attacks at the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris on Wednesday, January 7, carried out by 2 Islamist gunmen in revenge of the paper's publication of satirical images in the past. Just as they did in Paris, New York, London, and other cities around the world, attendees displayed their indignation at such a flagrant assault on freedom of expression, not to mention the absurd loss of life over cartoons. Joined by French ambassador to the Ivory Coast, Georges Serre, journalists and attendees lit candles and carried signs reading, "I am Charlie Hebdo."
If you have to censor drawings or opinions like this, it's a reflection of the fact that there are still sick people among us. It is clear that this will not make us retreat. We respect everyone's opinion, but still, those who do so must comply with all other opinions. I think that's what makes the world a cocktail of opinions.
Millions around the world gathered in solidarity to display their fury on the violent assault on freedom of expression that claimed 17 lives. In Ivory Coast, the journalists here used the opportunity to discuss issues of censorship and press freedom in their own country. The West African nation is emerging from a decade of political turmoil during which intimidation of journalists was seen as rampant. Umar Kamara, president of the Foreign Press Association, mentioned cases of journalists who had died in Ivory Coast who was shot by a policeman in 2003.
We say we want no more cases like Charlie Hebdo. We also do not want cases like Jean-Hélène Keffer that are happening here in Ivory Coast. It's a way for us to shout that we are fed up and say that we do not want the press to be muted.
The Paris attacks have raised difficult questions of free speech, religion, and security, and exposed the vulnerability of states to urban attacks.
I feel despair by what happened. I hope that this will awaken consciences in the world, of course in France and around the world, and that people will make sure that this never happens again.
Charlie Hebdo published a front-page caricature in its first edition since the gunmen attacked the satirical newspaper.
Well, it's been well over 1 year since the crisis in the world's newest country began between forces loyal to the South Sudan President Salva Kiir and forces loyal to his sacked deputy, Riek Machar. And as we say in Africa, when two elephants fight, it's definitely the grass that suffers. About 20,000 internally displaced people who were living in the UN compound in the capital, Juba, have been moved to a larger site that can accommodate more people. Conditions in the UN compound had deteriorated considerably, causing fears of disease outbreaks and hygiene concerns.
The civil war has killed more than 10,000 people in the world's newest state, reopened deep fault lines among ethnic groups, and caused more than 1 million people to flee from their homes. Tens of thousands sought shelter and protection in UN bases around the country. Dak Sigar, who works for the Relief, Reintegration and Protection Department of the United Nations Mission in South Sudan, however, believes the new site will provide better services for the displaced.
We have dealt with the immediate problems that we're facing these internally displaced people in. They are in better conditions now, but we still have a long way to go until we are where everybody wants to be, which is a safe and secure South Sudan, where everybody feels safe enough to go home.
Diplomats and analysts have warned there could be a spike in fighting as the dry season approaches after relative peace in the rainy season. Peace initiatives by the Regional Group of Nations, the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, have so far failed to end the conflict.
They wrote their position and they gave it to President Museveni. President Museveni sent it to me. We have now prepared our position in writing, and I will send it also to President Museveni.
Fears of unrest also means some of the displaced in Juba are hesitant to move to the new site.
People were very reluctant initially because it's always, the uncertainty of going to another place you don't know. It takes a while for people to build the confidence that the other place is just as good or better, and in this case definitely better, because people got a lot more space. The sanitary conditions are much better. I mean, the new site is really planned to house internally displaced people for a much longer period of time.
Aid agencies have warned famine could strike another 1 million people across South Sudan in early 2015 if the civil war escalates. Malnutrition is also a serious concern. In addition to limiting food production, the conflict has also disrupted markets and pushed up food prices.
Coming up after the break, it's time for the Africa Cup of Nations, but the fear of Ebola is ever present.
When it comes to good health, no journey is too far. Wherever there's information that can enhance your health and improve Nigeria's health sector, you can be sure Health News will be there to bring you the facts, latest news and medical breakthroughs. From the Assembly Hall of the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland, join me on the road to a healthier nation. Health News, promoting good health.
Welcome back. You're still tuned to Network Africa on Channels Television. Now, without a doubt, football is a sport which brings people together. But this time around, it's inducing a bit of fear concerning the Africa Cup of Nations. People are genuinely scared of being infected, especially since it's a contact sport. However, the Confederation of African Football said on Tuesday, January the 13th, that it is confident Equatorial Guinea will not face any potential problems from an Ebola outbreak when it hosts the 2015 Africa Nations Cup. Equatorial Guinea agreed in November to step in as last-minute hosts, replacing Morocco, who was stripped of the tournament, having asked for it to be postponed over fears of the spread of the Ebola virus. That left the tournament organizers with only 2 months to prepare for the continent's showpiece sporting event.
Morocco feared traveling fans could spread the deadly virus that has claimed more than 5,000 lives in West Africa. But according to CAF's Director of Communication, Junior Binyam, The new hosts have no such concerns. Equatorial Guinea has had an outbreak of Ebola, the deadly hemorrhagic fever, since it erupted in March, and with limited facilities, it is likely to attract just a handful of traveling fans, severely reducing any threat.
I don't have any fear about Ebola outbreak disturbing the African Cup of Nations. Just for you to know, we have gone through qualifiers since the month of April, and we have not had any single Ebola case related to a football game. Even when it comes to local football played in the host countries, we have not heard of any Ebola cases related to a football game, because when the outbreak starts, our national associations were instructed to stop the local leagues. As far as when we receive the prescription of WHO saying that mass gatherings must be avoided, we don't have till today any Ebola cases related to the activity of football. So we don't expect that it will happen during such a tournament where we have a better organization, where we have better trained people on ground, and we are aware of the outbreak. It was not like it was a surprise 8-9 months ago when people were not really considering it risky. Today, everybody knows it's risky, the population, the government, and everybody is acting accordingly. So the risk of having any case today is, I think, it's reduced than 8 or 9 months ago.